Hello. If we're ready to start our next session, I'm looking for Adam Limeweber in Christchurch. If he can just give us a nod to say he's ready. His presentation is utilizing machine learning for anomaly detection and editing in official statistics. We have six proposal presentations here, so they're 5 minutes each. So Adam, if you'd like to take it away, I'll let you know if we're running over time.
All right, hello. I am Adam Lineweber, and I'll be talking about my work on investigating automated anomaly detection and looking at treatment for official statistics. Just a quick disclaimer, these views are my own and not necessarily those of the Australian Bureau of Statistics. So we've seen in the past that machine learning has been used successfully for classification in official statistics. We saw that just before. And we're interested to see how machine learning can be used to improve and streamline editing. So we want to be able to target and inform human decision-making, especially. We're interested in machine learning because it can potentially detect unexpected anomalies that rules wouldn't be able to, and improve significance scores. We need to show that the method is fast, robust, easy to maintain, and explainable. We also need to show that it performs at least as well as more familiar approaches. So the data set we'll look at is the BAS data. It stands for Business Activity Statement. The reporting unit is an ABN CAC, and there are 4 target variables for editing, but we're just going to look at wages today. The existing process has an automated stage and some manual editing stages. So that means that we have labeled edit records, which is really exciting. The key concepts to keep in mind here are we have wages and wages withheld for tax purposes as variables. And going through this, we need to consider the impact on the BAS products, so unit records, benchmarking, and any published aggregates that come out. We have 2 stages. So we have an anomaly detection stage and a prediction stage. So the idea is that we identify anomalies using an unsupervised algorithm, so isolation forest or local outlier factor, and then we estimate the edit value of those anomalies with a random forest or gradient boosted decision tree. And that's a supervised algorithm trained on those manually corrected data points. So looking at performance, we can see that isolation forest tends to do a little bit better than local outlier factor tends to do a little bit better than isolation forest. We've got a confusion matrix at the top here, and then some metrics here, and generally the local outlier factor does a little bit better. These metrics probably underestimate the performance because the unlabeled anomalies or the unlabeled data is assumed to be all correct, which is not necessarily the case. It just means they weren't looked at. So when we look at performance, we look at wages against median wages. We expect to see a diagonal line of a low anomaly score, which we see for the local outlier factor. Isolation forest, not quite so much. The red outlined dot points are the labeled anomalies. So we can see that all of them are getting high anomaly scores, which is good to see. When we look at individual units, we can see that anomaly scores are spiking when there are spikes in wages, which is great to see. And we can also identify new anomalies with this approach. So these have not been edited, but we're still getting spikes in the anomaly scores when these dips are occurring. When we talk about prediction, we usually look at these histograms of percentage difference between the correct and predicted value, as well as some metrics, so things like mean squared error. This window. So random forest tends to be our best performing algorithm. We get mean squared error of 10 to the 14, and then comparing that to just taking the median of the last handful of records, we get something like 10 to the 12. So the median does better for mean squared error, but we see that when the random forest gets it right, it gets it bang on, and the mean squared error is blown up by a very small number of points that it gets very, very wrong. So if we look at like the 25th percentile of this absolute percentage error, it's about 2 for the random forest, whereas for the median, it's almost 5. So we're still working on this, but initial results are fairly promising.
Just a minute left.
Yep. So going forward, we really want to manage explainability. So we've been looking at approaches like Lime and Shapley to manage this. We also want to get expert advice on additionally labeling anomalies for better quality metrics. We need to assess the performance from end to end, so looking at the anomaly detection stage through to the prediction stage. And we really want to make sure that we're keeping the human in the loop at all times. Thank you.
Thanks, Adam. Our next speaker is Zachary Stein, and he's also at Christchurch. Zachary's presentation is apportioning economic data of multi-location businesses. Whenever you're ready, Zachary, thank you.
My name's Zach. Hope everyone's having a good day. Just before we kick things off, just want to say that the results that I show here are preliminary, and because the work is ongoing, they are subject to change. Now, with that out the way, we can get into a bit of background. So the ABS supports the Australian Climate Service by producing social and economic statistics, with the idea being that you're trying to investigate the effect that climate change has on society and our economy. Since climate is inherently a geographically bound phenomenon, what we're aiming to do is create economic statistics. So we're talking about turnover, wages, full-time equivalents at an SA2 level. So that's on average about 10,000 dwellings. Ideally, we'd like this at a frequency of annual or quarterly. So since the data source that we're using for these statistics is administrative, and in the case of businesses reported at the ABN level, we need a way of splitting the total values that are reported among their contributing locations. So what you can see from the plots is that across a variety of different market sectors and industry divisions, quite a significant proportion of the total turnover and wages belongs to businesses that operate in two or more distinct locations. So if we want to deal with these businesses and their quantities, we need a method of allocating. We've identified a few, the first being equal allocation. We just split them equally, and that's what's currently in use. There's the average economic indicator, which allocates based on the median turnover and wages in each area. There's census place of work, based on the average number of census respondents working in an area by the number of businesses, and then single touch payroll. So that's the number of linked employees that live in the same area as the locations. So our goal is to have complete number of employees and their weekly paid wages at each location. Hopefully this serves as a good proxy for the economic activity in those regions. We use Blade in the bottom left there, which contains the economic data that we wish to apportion. There's the business locations data, which has all the locations of the businesses. Then we join it with STP data. So that has our tax data with our weekly wages. And it also provides a way of linking census respondents to a particular business. Then to get the respondents to the locations, we use the place of work field. So that's the location that they report working in the week prior to census. And this location matching can be done at either the mesh block, which is smaller, or the SA2 level, which is what we're after in the end. It's possible that people don't necessarily work in the same mesh block as the location, but they do work in the same SA2. So questions around whether that contributes. We compare the proportions derived on the validation set, or a subset, which is a subset of that joint data set that we derive for the businesses that we think the data set provides a pretty accurate source of truth for. And there's questions around whether you use mesh block, location linking, or SA2 level, or whether the number of employees or the weekly paid wages is a better proxy. So we compare across them all. Surprisingly, equal allocation actually achieves the lowest mean squared error in all those cases, at least on our validation set, but they're all reasonably close. Project's still ongoing, and there's some stuff we'd like to look at in the future. So that includes testing the sensitivity of these results to the way that we define business locations and their associated methodology, testing the sensitivity to how we derive our validation set. So that's like the proportion of employees that are captured to derive these proportions, for example. And then we also want to produce stratified comparisons, see if different methods are more appropriate for different kinds of businesses. Thus, if we want to apportion the entire data set, we may need a combination thereof. If anyone has any questions about RASADOC?
Thanks very much, Zach. The questions will be at the end. Thanks. Questions will be at the end of the session. So we're going to go over to Hobart now. Our next speaker is Weihao Li, and the presentation is Autovi, Automated Assessment of Residual Plots Using Computer Vision. So whenever you're ready.
Hi, everyone. I'm Patrick from Monash University. I'm a graduating PhD student in the final 2 months. And today's topic I want to present is the automated assessment of residual plot using computer vision. This is actually an R package, and also have a shiny web applications that if you don't actually want to use my package, you can also try now that web portal to see if it works for you. And I will start with a challenge that this is an example residual plot that is fitted for multiple linear regression model. And at first glance, if you just look at this residual plot, you may think that, okay, there's some heteroscedasticity issue there because you see the left triangle shape. But that's actually an overinterpretation of residual plot because I simulated data I know is actually correctly specified, and that left triangle shape is actually from the skew distributions of the predictor. So I'm using a log normal distribution for one of the predictor there, so it caused that shape. And interestingly, if you're try, for example, now a Bruch-Pagan test, now BP test for this particular data set, it will still reject this shape. So it will incorrectly reject the null hypothesis. And how do we deal with that? Well, we have some technique called NIA protocol or visual inference. Basically, that you first assume your fitted model is fully correct, and you simulate some residual from that fitted model, and then you plot those residuals in a matrix. And you will find that from those, we call them now residual plots, the left triangle shape is relatively common. So it's not that weird to see some left triangle shape for this particular data set. And that's how we justify the correctness of the model. But using this so-called NIA protocol for each of the data sets is kind of time consuming. So what I have developed in this package is some automated way to handle it. So basically this package using underlying computer vision model, which I will not cover in these sections because if you want more details, you can go into my GitHub pages, they are there. And it basically estimates something called visual signal strength, which quantifies the disparity between the actual residual distributions and reference distributions. And the reference distribution is based on the conditions that you assume the model is fully correct. And I would first use the Boston housing data set to illustrate how that package works. So the details of the model, it doesn't really matter. You just look at that residual plot, you'll find there's a U shape there. So some nonlinearity issue with the residual plot. And first we can use the residual checker to initialize a checker and checker object. And the rotate residual is what I mentioned before, that if you would like to simulate some residual from the fitted model, you could use this method and it will give you a table. The first column is still the fitted values that is from your original model. But the second column, the residuals are now replaced by those simulated values. And if you plot it on the right-hand side, you will see that the residuals are kind of in a good conditions, randomly scattered around the 0, 9, and no particular pattern there. No particular pattern there. So it's in a good conditions. And next, this is the call method that you can get the visual signal strength by just call the method. If you call it without any argument, it will just return to you with the visual signal string of the original residual plot. So it's this 6.4a is the visual signal string for this particular residual plot. And if you would like it to predict it for a null plot, for a residual plot that is simulated from the model, then you can also do that now on the right-hand side. And if you want, as I mentioned in the beginning of the slide, that we need some comparison between the residual plot and the null plots. And that's exactly what it does in this check method, that we simulate 100 draws there, and then you see all of the contents of the now within visual signal strings, and then you could do a hypothesis testing to see if the model actually has incorrectly specified, is incorrectly specified. And I will move on to some of the examples I have here. So this left triangle one, you see the computer vision model actually gives you something on the for the dash line, 1 point something in here. I don't have a mouse on here, but basically you see that the solid line is a 95% content of the null distributions, but the dash line, which is the observed one, is on the left-hand side of the dash line. It means that these particular visual tests would not reject the non-hypothesis. So it would detect that, okay, that left triangle shape is actually kind of common, so it would not reject. But for this particular dinosaur shape, the nonlinearity test, the Ramsey test will not reject. The BP test will not reject. Only the non-nonlinearity test will reject. And our model will also correctly reject it. And you see the dash line is on the right-hand side of the solid line. So it means that it's bypassed the 95% content, so reject it. And also, as I mentioned before, there's Shiny applications. And if you want to check out the slide, there's some URL on the bottom of the slide. There you can also check it out. It's just the URL for this particular slide. And also, there's some relevant links there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Mahdi Nourai, and the presentation name is Enhancing Stability Selection to Identify Important Variables Using Bayesian Approaches. Whenever you're ready.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Mahdi Nourai, and today I'm going to talk about Bayesian or Bayesian stability selection, which is the first project of my PhD program. Okay. First things first. What kind of data we are working on in this project? Here we work with tabular data, which is usually denoted by matrix format, where we have n different observations or samples as different rows, and for each observation we have a response variable y and p different covariates or simply variables. And here the aim is to apply a variable selection method, perform variable selection. So the question is, what is variable selection? Variable selection simply means the process of selecting the most important variables from the data set in order to, for example, train a predictive model such as a regression model. And you may be familiar with some of the popular variable selection methods such as backward, forward, or stepwise regression or lasso regression. And an important aspect of variable selection algorithms is their stability. Here the question is how the selections and preferences of the algorithm change by changing the training data set. And it is a well-known and popular problem in statistical literature. Stability selection is a general framework which firstly was introduced in 2010, firstly by Meinshausen and Bullman. And here the idea is, okay, instead of applying the variable selection algorithm on our original data set, let's do this. Let's draw several random resamples from the data set and apply the selection algorithm on each of them and record the selection result somewhere. And at the end, aggregate the selection results and select the variables that are consistently selected over the most of the resamples as stable variables. We endorse this approach, but we raise some issues with selection frequencies. Here, selection frequency simply means the percentage of the time that a variable is selected as important variable over the random resamples. So, for example, we show that these selection frequencies can become erratic and unreliable in presence of highly correlated covariates, such as in biological data sets. And conventional stability selection frequencies do not incorporate prior domain knowledge. So we enhance these frequencies to inclusion probabilities using Bayes theorem and Bayesian tools in order to bring in prior domain knowledge to the decision-making process about variable selection. And there is a lack of inferential tools such as credible intervals for these frequencies. So in response, we offer Bayesian credible intervals to quantify the uncertainty around these frequencies. Our work, Bayesian stability selection and inference on inclusion probabilities, is now submitted to a journal, and a preprint version of it is available on arXiv, and you can easily download it by scanning this QR code if you are interested. I give you a few seconds if you want to do this. Okay, thank you. And yep, that's it. This is my email address. Please let me know if you are interested in variable selection, Bayesian inference, stability selection. Please contact me. And thank you very much for your time and attention. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mehdi. Our next speaker is also in Hobart. This is Anant Mahur, and this presentation name is Algorithms for Lasso Feature Selection.
Hi.
I think Anant's actually online.
Yes,
Oh.
I'm going to do it online if that's okay.
That's great. That's great. Whenever you're ready.
Great. Okay, so you can see my presentation.
Yes, that's great. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll be talking about algorithms for group Lasso, and it's related to Marty's talk, so it's good that he defined some of the concepts so I don't have to. This work is jointly done with my supervisors, Zdravko, Botev, and Sharat Moka. So in biology and gene sequencing analysis, it's very common to come across data sets where we want to identify important genes that relate to a common complex shared trait between individuals. So this may be a group of individuals that share a trait like susceptibility to heart disease or lung disease, and we want to identify which traits are predictive. Which genes are predictive. And these genes are usually grouped by domain experts, so we can consider them as a group of some predictors. So Lasso, as Marty mentioned, does this by penalizing the least squares of the predictors and also applies a penalty on the coefficients themselves. And this allows the estimate to be sparse, and we interpret the sparsity to the zeros in our coefficients to represent predictors which are not important. So in the group case, it's the same idea, except now we have vectors of coefficients and we penalize the norm of the vectors. So what this does is it either sets an entire vector of the coefficients to 0 or non-zero, and we interpret that vector to mean corresponding to a group of predictors which are not important, so a gene which is not important. And the nice thing is that when the vectors are all length 1, we get the Lasso back. So if we can come up with an algorithm to solve the group Lasso, we automatically get an algorithm for the one-dimensional Lasso. So this work is a new algorithm for the group Lasso, and briefly what it does is it has these new variables gamma 1 through to gamma j, which represent if there are j groups, there's a representative for each gamma variable. We're going to define a new objective gamma g, which in terms of gamma, and we're going to implement an NMM algorithm to solve that. So just a quick bit of maths here. We can define these variables in terms of gammas, and this relates the gammas to our predictors and our coefficients. And then instead of solving the group Lasso objective, we go about solving this new objective, which has just in terms of the gammas. And once we solve this in terms of the gammas, we can recollect our coefficients in terms of B, so our original group Lasso coefficients. And the nice thing about this is it's conducive to a MM algorithm, which goes about, if you have a very complex objective, you can successively majorize or simplify that objective, solve that simple objective, and then iteratively repeat the step. So this is called a majorize minimize algorithm. And new optimization lends itself to this quite nicely. So in terms of how this works in practice, we see here in the red the standard algorithm for solving the group of SO, block coordinate descent. So here I've run a number of simulations, and we can see that the MM algorithm in blue converges a lot faster, especially as you get closer and closer to the solution. So in this case, there's some correlation here. So that is a nice area for future study in seeing how correlation between these features can impact convergence analysis. Thank you.
Thanks very much. We could welcome our next speaker, please, is Andrew Gross, and he's here in Perth. So we have Andrew.
Hi, just checking you can hear me.
Okay. He's online. Hi, Andrew.
Hello. Can you hear me? Just checking.
Yes, we can hear you perfectly.
Perfect. Let me just share my screen.
Great.
Assume you can see that. Give me full screen. Yep. So today I'm going to be providing an explanation and insight into telematics through a company called MT Data. So this will involve how it typically works, some of the lessons I've learned when using R in terms of data analysis and visualization. So what is MT Data? So MT Data, which is owned by Telstra, provides in-vehicle telematics to help track location and vehicle health or operational characteristics of fleets of vehicles. So the ultimate goal is to collect telematics data to improve operational efficiency, enhance safety and reduce costs and optimize performance essentially. So what is, so the device on the left is called the onboard unit, which connects to the vehicle's electronic system, and then it transmits data through Telstra's cellular network. So this includes things such as GPS location and driver behavior, vehicle performance, so like fuel usage, odometer, RPMs, and just a huge amount of data. So here are some examples and applications of using MT data to optimize operational efficiency. I mean, there's just so much data and so many like opportunities. And then leveraging R for analysis. So here are a number of packages I've found most useful in working with telemetry. I hope these can be applied to, they can be applied to other data, so not just telemetry, so hopefully you can find benefit in these. Firstly, telemetry data can be quite large and often messy from my experience. So packages like read-R is extremely useful to load in data chunk by chunk, which just speeds up the time that it takes to read data. JSON Lite, although it's not essential for MT data, it's helpful for reading in data from external sources which use JSON file formats. And then arguably the most time-consuming step is the data cleaning and manipulation. So Tidyverse is probably the most useful tool I find. And then Lubridate, if you want to work with dates and times, is also useful. I also find the SF package quite important in the cleaning data step, which is kind of looks at GIS and that's good for manipulation and data analysis. And then the data visualization is also quite important because you need to in cleaning data, I found visualizing spatial data is quite important. So ggplot, obviously, most of you would be familiar with. It's extremely flexible for plotting and such. And this can be combined with SF objects and ggmap, which is essentially just you can export kind of satellite or street view, sorry, not street view, street map plots. I'll show you some examples here. And yeah, the visualization I've kind of covered. So this is just an example of how I've used ggplot to help visualize some telemetry data. So I could understand how the vehicles are using the given route. So yeah, this is also important for cleaning data. I didn't want to include data where a truck was going onto a different street or a freeway. So yeah, it's just using kind of altitude might have been helpful, but yeah, there's issues with that as well. And then yeah, things like ggplot with ggmap here, you can visualize any variable over space. So one of the most difficult aspects of telemetry data is handling the sheer amount of data and all the cleaning that comes with it. So you need to make it, first of all, analyzable. So yeah, that's probably the biggest step I've experienced. And then hopefully this talk you can understand just the amount of data and kind of a bit about the insight that telemetry provides and how R can be leveraged to help analyze this telemetry data. Hopefully I've demonstrated some learnings to others. I know telemetry data may not be used a lot in statistics, but yeah, hopefully can provide some insight, especially for spatial analysis and spatial data and the wrangling or visualization of it. I've included some helpful resources if need be. I found them really useful. Obviously, CRAN, your repository, they have a good summary page of spatial analysis, and then a book by Brunsden and Comer. That's about it. Thanks for listening. I'll just stop sharing.
Thanks very much, Andrew. Thanks, that was very interesting. You'll join me in thanking all of our presenters in that session. We had a great range and variety of talks there. I can't see any questions on the Slack just now. Does anybody in the room here have any questions for our speakers? I'll just pass this over to Trent.
A question for Andrew. With the data you're working with, how did you handle what were some of the problems you faced with the telemetry data? For example, I worked with some data that was mining trucks on a mine site, and it was all sort of coming from the GPS unit on the truck. And
yeah.
the database people thought it'd be a great idea to interpolate between points where there was missing data. So what happened was the trucks would just teleport between locations, and I couldn't work out how far they drove, even though I needed to find that out. Was there a lot of problems like that you faced?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. So I didn't catch your name, but yeah, Brent. Yeah. So that's the biggest issue I think with telemetry data and MT data, especially. They're doing their own processing in the background, and many of that is kind of like a black box. So you don't know what they're doing, and you can't assume that what they're doing is statistically valid. So I think that's hopefully where the visualization comes in. You can obviously, if they're interpolating, visualization can point to that, but yeah, I found similar kind of roadblocks in that. Yeah, there's also things they can't control, such as I think I was having an issue where suddenly the odometer reading or some other reading would just increase to like hundreds of thousands above. So essentially it's an outlier, but it would then use that value and then keep counting it. So one of the issues was I found that it was when the ignition was turned on, the odometer, I guess, spikes for some reason, something to do with the electronics unit. And yeah, so I can't provide it much insight into that, but yeah, just visualizing the data helps a lot. Understanding a data is probably the most important step, because you can't be, I guess, reliant on whether your data is accurate or not. I mean, it is, but yeah, to some extent, there's some processing going down in the background. So that's, yeah.
Great,
That's
thanks
all I-
very much. Thanks very much for that, Andrew. We have a question in the Slack for Patrick. It's from Kylie Lang. I'd be interested in whether these plots help applied statisticians make accurate decisions about the suitability of a model. Have you done any experiments or assessments on that?
I haven't done any assessments on using this particular computer vision model, but I have done a previous experience on using NIA protocol compared to using hypothesis testing, traditional or conventional hypothesis testing. And it shows that using NIA protocol or visual inference actually avoids rejecting the model when the violations is minor. So when the model is actually violating some model assumptions, but it's still acceptable. So the violation is small, and the visual inference actually would less sensitive to those kind of rejections, but the conventional test would mostly reject the model. So we throw away some of the model that potentially to be still to be the good model.
Thanks very much. And we have another question for you, Patrick, if you don't mind. Can you please clarify the advantage of visual ML inspection versus normal statistical tests for assumption violation, which presumably account for the left triangle distribution?
Pardon, would you, I do?
Do you want me to repeat it? Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So for this aspect, so a normal or conventional statistical tests for assumption violation usually only target one assumption at a time. So for example, if you're doing nonlinearity tests or heteroscedasticity tests, that you're only targeting for one particular assumptions. But this kind of ML inspections or visual tests, they are targeting a whole spectrum of assumptions. So they are testing it all together, usually.
Thanks very much. I had a question for Andrew, for Adam as well, when he was talking about the Bass anomalies. What anomalies are you specifically looking for?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Oftentimes the anomalies are errors in filling out the form. So things like leaving out a decimal place are fairly common when reporting. Fairly common. They happen occasionally when leaving out when writing a wages value. So you end up with a 2 orders of magnitude increase, which is uncommon.
Okay. Thank you. So it's basic stuff.
Yeah, but there's all kinds of stuff. Sometimes the ratio between wages and wages withheld is way off, and that needs to be looked into. All kinds of stuff like that.
Okay, thank you very much. So do we have any questions in any of the other hubs?
Hello, it's Eamon from Christchurch, or from the ABS mainly. So a question for Anand. I was wondering, I have some experience using expectation maximization to fit some models, and I was curious what the advantage was of using something a bit more complicated with the majorize, minimize, and how did you choose like what function you're going to minimize for those steps?
Yes, so I think majorize, minimize is just a more general framework for the EM algorithm. So on the EM algorithm, you have to come up with this conditional expectation step. In our case, there was no conditional expectation. It's just the tricky part is coming up with a simple majorizing function. And in our case, it just happened that there was a specific formula we could use, which had a nice closed form solution. But you can think of the EM algorithm as just an example of the MM algorithm with a particular type of majorizing function.
Yep, that makes sense. Thanks, Anand.
Thanks very much. Do you have any more questions here in the room? Well, we close it up there. Thanks very much, and thanks for those presentations.